Capture 1. A War at a Crossroads, 1972. It is late 1972 in Vietnam, the 11th year of a grueling conflict with no clear end. The United States has withdrawn most of its ground troops, and hopes for peace hang on fragile negotiations. In Paris, American diplomat Henry Kissinger and North Vietnamese representative Le Duc Tho have been hammering out a deal. By October, they reached a draft agreement, raising optimism that the war might finally end. But that hope soon falters. South Vietnam's President Thieu vehemently rejects the terms, unwilling to accept North Vietnamese forces remaining in the south. Negotiations stall. North Vietnam, sensing political shifts in America, hesitates as well. U.S. President Richard Nixon, fresh from re-election, grows frustrated at Hanoi's refusal to finalize the peace. With the clock ticking, a new U.S. Congress dominated by anti-war sentiment is set to convene in January 1973. Nixon decides to resort to a drastic measure. He will unleash the full might of American air power to break the deadlock. In his view, only a massive shock can bring the North Vietnamese back to the table. The instrument of that shock will be the Strategic Air Command's oldest and grandest hammer, the B-52 Stratofortress bomber. These enormous aircraft, designed in the early Cold War and reminiscent of the heavy bombers of World War II, have been raining destruction in Vietnam for years on a smaller scale. They've pounded enemy positions in the south and along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but never before have they been sent in full force against North Vietnam's capital, Hanoi, or its vital port, Haiphong. That is about to change. Nixon gives the order. Operation Linebacker II will commence on December 18, 1972. The goal is clear: bomb Hanoi to force peace. The Americans prepare for an aerial onslaught like nothing since World War II, and the North Vietnamese will soon face an apocalypse from the sky that they cannot believe. Capture 2. Bombers over Hanoi. Operation Linebacker II begins dusk, December 18, 1972. On the remote Pacific island of Guam, the ground rumbles as 8 engines ignite underneath a B-52 Stratofortress, then another and another. Dozens of them. One after another, the giant bombers taxi and roar down the runway, taking to the air. In total, 87 B-52s lift off from Andersen Air Force Base on Guam this day, the largest single bomber launch in U.S. history. The thunder of their departures shakes the tropical island. Witnesses miles away can hear the continuous roar and feel the vibrations as wave after wave of the big ugly fat fellows, as the crews affectionately call the B-52, climb into the sky. Hours later, these Guam-based planes rendezvous over the South China Sea with 42 more B-52s coming from Utapao Airfield in Thailand. In all, 129 Stratofortresses are in the air, converging toward North Vietnam. It is an awe-inspiring armada, nearly the entire heavy bomber strength of the U.S. Air Force, flying into one of the most fiercely defended airspaces on Earth. Their mission this first night is ambitious: hit key targets around Hanoi and Haiphong to stun the enemy. The B-52 crews, each plane manned by 6 airmen, have been briefed in detail. They will fly in tight formations of 3 known as cells to maximize their electronic jamming protection. Strategic Air Command has insisted on a straight, steady path to the target. No evasive maneuvers during the bomb run to ensure accuracy and keep the formation's jamming shield intact. This means as they approach the drop point, the bombers will be flying predictable courses, like target practice for enemy gunners. The crews know the stress, but orders are orders. Alongside the bomber force, a large contingent of support aircraft is in action. Navy jets from the 7th Fleet strike early, taking out coastal radar sites. Air Force F-111 Aardvark strike planes slip in at low level to crater runways at North Vietnamese airfields, hoping to keep enemy MiG fighters grounded. Flights of F-4 Phantom IIs prowl the skies as combat air patrol, ready to tangle with any MiGs that do rise, and also dispensing shiny clouds of chaff, strips of foil, to confuse enemy radar. Specialized Wild Weasel jets, venerable F-105 Thunder Chiefs equipped with anti-radar missiles, hunt the enemy's SAM surface-to-air missile batteries. Electronic warfare planes orbit further out, jamming enemy signals. This grand orchestration of aircraft all serves one purpose: to get the B-52s safely to their targets and back. Shortly after 7:45 p.m. Hanoi time, air raid sirens begin wailing in the capital. North Vietnamese radar picks up a huge mass of inbound aircraft. The defenders have been expecting some kind of U.S. strike. Since Nixon's ultimatum a few days earlier, Hanoi has braced itself, but the sheer scale of this attack is beyond anything they imagined. In previous bombing campaigns, American raids came in smaller waves or restricted certain areas. This time, the Americans are sending everything straight at the heart of North Vietnam. Hanoi's commanders scramble their defenses. Soviet-made radar-guided SAM missiles are their deadliest threat to the high-flying B-52s, and Hanoi's SAM crews have honed their skills over years of war. Dozens of missile batteries around the city swing into action, and crackling voices on North Vietnamese radios coordinate targeting for the coming onslaught. Night has fallen as the first cells of B-52s approach the target zone at about 30,000 feet. The giant planes line up on the bomb run, each cell of 3 bombers flying in formation, each aircraft loaded with up to 108 conventional bombs in its belly and on wing pylons. Below, Hanoi's lights are blacked out. Many civilians have already hurried into bomb shelters, clutching radios and each other as they wait in darkness. For a moment, the only sounds are the distant drone of high-altitude jet engines. Then hell breaks loose. From the ground, North Vietnamese SAM sites unleash a barrage of missiles. The sky lights up with angry orange fireballs as SAMs roar upward. Some come in salvos of 3, 4, 6 at a time, leaving glowing trails that stretch toward the altitude of the bombers. Anti-aircraft guns around Hanoi also open up, filling the air above the city with flak bursts. To the B-52 crews, it seems like the whole sky is alight with deadly fireworks. "SAM launch, SAM launch," crackles the warning on the intercom, as electronic sensors pick up the telltale signals of missiles in the air. Each crew braces, holding their bomber on a steady path despite every survival instinct screaming to jink away. Inside one B-52, the electronic warfare officer calmly triggers jamming devices, hoping to blind the missile's radar guidance. In another, a navigator counts down seconds to bomb release, even as he sees a distant flash below, a SAM lifting off in their direction. The discipline is extraordinary. These crews maintain their formation and course right through the storm of missiles. Then, the B-52s let loose their vengeance. One by one, each Stratofortress drops its payload. Dozens of unguided bombs tumble out of the bomb bays and racks, starting a long descent to Earth. Within seconds, hundreds of explosives begin erupting across the landscape below. Hanoi's residents hear a thunderous rumble and feel the ground shaking as strings of bombs detonate in waves. In this first night's attack, the targets include the sprawling Yen Vien rail yard, a key hub that feeds supplies into Hanoi, the Kin No vehicle depot, where trucks and tanks are repaired, several airfields ringing Hanoi, Kep, Hoa Lac, Phuc Yen, where MiG fighters are based, and even the Hanoi radio station, whose broadcasts suddenly crackle into static as bombs crater the facility. The city of Hanoi experiences its fiercest bombing in history. Blocky, Soviet-built air raid shelters shudder, and plumes of flame and smoke rise into the night. Civilians hunker in tunnels and basements as the sky above them flashes white-orange with constant explosions. Through this chaos, the B-52 formations fly straight, dropping their ordnance and then executing a pre-planned sharp turn to exit the target area. This post-target turn is a critical, vulnerable moment. As the Stratofortresses bank and roll, their reflective cross-section to radar increases, and their jamming cover can weaken. The North Vietnamese know this. They have drilled relentlessly for this scenario. Missile crews quickly adjust their aim to catch the bombers as they turn. More SAMs streak upward. On this first night, some American crews see the deadly missiles too late. A B-52 flying under the call sign Charcoal 01 takes a direct hit, erupting into a fireball in the sky. Another bomber, Peach 02, is hit and plummets earthward in pieces. A third, Rose 01, also succumbs to a missile blast. Each carried 6 men. Some manage to eject and drift down under parachutes into captivity or death, while others have no chance. In quick succession, 3 B-52s are lost over Hanoi on that first night. Other crews grit their teeth and maintain formation, even as shockwaves from exploding SAMs buffet their airplanes. In total, more than 200 SAMs have been fired this night. Miraculously, or thanks to skill and a bit of luck, the losses are not worse. Out of 129 bombers that struck, the vast majority make it out, albeit some trailing smoke or damaged by shrapnel. US commanders, anxiously monitoring the operation, had feared far worse casualties. 3 bombers down is costly, but they deem it acceptable given the scale of the assault. For the men who went through it, it was a harrowing trial by fire. Yet the first day of Operation Linebacker II has proven one thing. The B-52s can reach Hanoi and hit their targets, despite the heaviest air defenses ever encountered. Below, in Hanoi's dust and darkness, the North Vietnamese leadership reels from the shock. They had expected attacks, yes, but not this ferocity. The sky seemed filled with B-52s, and the relentless carpet of bombs has shattered multiple sites. Some leaders take shelter in bunkers, while urgently assessing damage and coordinating the defense for the nights to come. Ordinary Hanoians emerge from shelters to scenes of devastation. Fires burning, craters in roads, and ruins of targeted facilities. Among the ruins is the city's main hospital, Bach Mai, which has been accidentally struck by stray bombs. Dozens of medical staff and patients lie dead amid the rubble. This tragic collateral damage will soon fuel international outcry and give Hanoi potent propaganda. But in these first hours, the priority for the North is survival. Crews reload the missile launchers and repair radars through the night, preparing for the next wave. If the Americans intend to keep this up, Hanoi's defenders resolve to make them pay dearly. Meanwhile, up above, the US Air Force crews are heading home through the night sky. Many bombers are low on fuel, and exhaustion is setting in after the nerve-wracking mission. Air-to-air refueling tankers meet the returning Guam B-52s to top them up for the long flight back across the sea. As the first weary crews touch down in Guam and Thailand in the early morning hours of December 19th, they bring astonishing tales of skies filled with missiles, of blinding flak, and of targets lit up like daytime under the glare of explosions. Perhaps the most remarkable story comes from a B-52 with the call sign Brown 03. During the melee, as this bomber was exiting the target area, a North Vietnamese MiG-21 jet made a daring pass at the formation, attempting to bring down one of the lumbering bombers with its cannon or a heat-speaking missile. In a twist straight out of a World War II saga, the B-52's tail gunner, Staff Sergeant Samuel Turner, spotted the MiG and opened fire with his quad 50 caliber machine guns in the tail turret. His burst of tracers miraculously found their mark. The MiG-21 burst into flames and spiraled down. It was the first ever air-to-air kill scored by a Stratofortress in combat. The news of a B-52 shooting down a MiG electrified the bomber crews and gave them a jolt of pride amid the losses. Day 1 of the campaign is over. The United States has shown its determination with an all-out strike, and Hanoi now knows what it's up against. But Operation Linebacker II is just getting started. Both sides are learning and adapting rapidly. The Americans review the first night's results and losses, seeking ways to improve tactics. The North Vietnamese, stunned but resilient, plan new ways to make the sky giants bleed. A deadly rhythm of night bombings is about to begin. 11 days that will change the course of the war. Capture 3. Blood and fire in the sky. The 11-day war rages. By the second night, December 19th, US commanders refine their strategy. The initial shock of the first raid is wearing off, and now it becomes a test of endurance and ingenuity. American planners decide on some adjustments. B-52 formations will fly slightly lower, around 34,000 to 35,000 feet, to stay fully inside the protective chaff corridors laid by the fighter escorts. The timing between bomber cells is increased, spacing them out a bit more to avoid bunching up in the danger zone. Critically, crews are now authorized to take evasive action both inbound and outbound if threatened, a small but significant loosening of the earlier rigid orders. This means pilots can jink or change altitude to dodge ASAM if they see one coming straight at them, rather than stoically absorbing the blow. These changes reflect lessons learned from the first night's harrowing experience. On December 19th's night missions, the campaign's second night, about 93 B-52s thunder toward North Vietnam to continue the pressure. The targets are similar: rail yards, supply depots, and airfields around Hanoi and Haiphong, because many still need to be knocked out. The men in the cockpits are tired but resolved. Many of them are flying their second mission in as many days, with memories of the previous night's inferno fresh in their minds. As darkness falls, the bombers approach once again. Hanoi's defenders are ready and waiting this time. They know the Americans will be back. SAM batteries that survived the first attack and new ones rushed in from outlying areas have repositioned and reloaded. When the incoming waves are detected on radar, the familiar orchestra of sirens and gunfire begins anew. However, the adjustments seem to make a difference. On the second night, North Vietnamese SAM crews launch roughly 180 missiles, another massive salvo. But the B-52s juke and jam effectively. Thicker chaff clouds confound radar locks. Some missiles that do manage to reach the altitude of the bombers find empty sky where formations used to be, because the Americans have varied their routes and timing slightly. Not a single B-52 is lost on this second night of bombing. The formations deliver their bombs with brutal efficiency, pummeling more of North Vietnam's vital infrastructure. The rumble of detonations echoes again across Hanoi and Haiphong. Targets like the Lang Dang rail yard and the Kep airfield go up in flames under the carpet bombing. For Hanoi, the punishment continues unabated, and for the US airmen, this success without losses is a much-needed boost in confidence. They have proven that with smart tactics, they can survive the fearsome air defenses. But war is unpredictable, and the enemy adapts as well. The respite is short-lived. December 20th, the third straight night of attacks, will go down as one of the darkest days for the B-52 force. US commanders stick with heavy pressure. Nearly 100 B-52s are sent in that night. The North Vietnamese, meanwhile, refine their own tactics. They have observed how the bombers fly, and especially their vulnerability during the post-strike turn. Now they coordinate their SAM batteries to concentrate on those crucial moments. As the first wave of B-52s comes over Hanoi on December 20th, the sky erupts into perhaps the most intense barrage yet. Ground controllers in Hanoi, desperate to stop the onslaught, order their SAM units to fire in coordinated ripples. At one point, more than 40 missiles are reported in the air simultaneously, the countless flaming trails making it look as if the very stars are streaking down the sky. The B-52 crews maintain formation and discipline, but the volume of fire is overwhelming. One by one, the giant planes are caught by Soviet-built SA-2 guideline missiles that explode with devastating effect. That night, losses mount alarmingly. In the first bombing wave alone, 2 B-52Gs and 1 B-52D are blasted out of the sky. In a later wave, 3 more bombers, 2 G models and 1 D, are shot down. Some are hit before they can drop their bombs. Others are hit moments after bombs away during the evasive turn. On the radios, fellow crews hear the terse distress beacons and mayday calls as comrades go down. It is a gut-wrenching sound that no airman ever forgets. The squawk of the emergency locator beacon, nicknamed Warble Warble, triggered when a crew ejects, echoing through the static-filled comms. Over the Hanoi skies this night, those distress signals are heard far too often. Of the nearly 100 bombers sent, 6 B-52s are lost in a single night. Dozens of American airmen are suddenly missing, some floating down by parachute into enemy territory, others likely killed in the fiery blasts. The scene from the ground is both triumphant and terrifying. Flaming wreckage tumbling down in the darkness, parachutes blossoming. Some Hanoi citizens reportedly cheered seeing the mighty bombers falling, even as their own city burned around them. For North Vietnamese defenders, this is a night of hard-won success. They have exacted the heaviest toll yet on the American force. For the U.S. Strategic Air Command, the losses amount to nearly 7% of the entire B-52 strike force in one day, an unsustainable rate if it continues. In the dead of that night, high commanders in Washington and Saigon anxiously evaluate the situation. President Nixon and his advisors receive word of the losses. Each B-52 down means potential POWs or worse, and the risk of a public backlash at home grows with every casualty. Some in Washington wonder if the campaign should be halted or scaled back. Can any objective justify such losses? But others argue that to stop now would squander the progress made and let Hanoi off the hook. Across the world, anti-war critics are already condemning the Christmas bombing as barbaric. Nixon, however, is resolute. He believes this massive strike is the only way to compel Hanoi to sign the peace. Likewise, the Air Force leadership, especially General John C. Meyer, the head of Strategic Air Command, refuses to blink. Despite the mounting losses, Meyer decides to press on with even greater ferocity. He greenlights new tactics to counter the SAM threat. Even more SAM suppression missions, more fighter bombers hunting the missile batteries, and attacks on the storage depots feeding those SAM sites. The Americans realize that North Vietnam's missile stockpiles are not endless. If they keep hitting the SAM sites and forcing the enemy to expend missiles at a high rate, eventually, the threat will wane. U.S. pilots also devise improved maneuvering sequences. They compress the timing between bomber cells on the approach, hoping to saturate defenses in shorter bursts. They alter withdrawal routes. Some bomber streams now exit directly toward the Gulf of Tonkin, instead of looping around, to throw off enemy calculations. Electronic warfare officers get permission to employ an additional radar jammer, an ALT-28 transmitter, to interfere with the missile's guidance signals. In sum, the U.S. Air Force adapts quickly, determined not to let this aerial offensive fail. December 21st, Day 4, sees a temporary scaling back of the bomber force to avoid further disaster while adjustments take effect. Only 30 B-52s, all from the Utapao base in Thailand, fly missions that night, hitting targets on the outskirts of Hanoi. The planning is simplified and tight. With a smaller strike package, coordination with support fighters is more focused. Even so, the night is not without cost. Over Hanoi's western edge, as two B-52s unload bombs on the Bac Mai airfield, not far from the already bombed hospital of the same name, North Vietnamese SAMs find their mark. Two B-52Ds are shot down in flames. The sight of parachutes is by now an all too familiar and haunting image for both sides. After this, the Americans have lost 9 B-52s in 4 nights. That's over 50 airmen killed or captured in a matter of days. U.S. aircrews steel themselves with grim resolve. They will not turn back, no matter what. Indeed, one proud tradition is upheld throughout Linebacker II. No B-52 aborts its mission for fear of enemy fire. Crews press on regardless of the inferno awaiting them, honoring the code that no bomber would turn away from its target due to enemy opposition. This courage under fire is something the North Vietnamese defenders take note of, even as they work feverishly to shoot the intruders from the sky. Now at the halfway point of the 11-day blitz, both sides are bruised. Hanoi's infrastructure is being systematically wrecked. Rail lines are cut, supply depots ablaze, power plants destroyed. Each day brings new columns of smoke on the horizon and new craters in the earth. Yet Hanoi's anti-air defenses, though battered, remain lethal. Their SAM stocks have been drawn down by the hundreds, but more missiles arrive by rail from China and the Soviet Union's aid pipeline. North Vietnamese commanders are grimly determined to defend the capital at all costs, and propaganda broadcasts rally the people to endure the bombing a little longer. On the American side, there is a sense of urgency. The war planners know they must finish this operation quickly and decisively. President Nixon cannot sustain such an intense campaign indefinitely. Global and domestic pressures are intensifying. Christmas is approaching, and the irony of this horrific bombardment coinciding with the holiday is not lost on the world. Each passing day also increases the chance of political intervention by the US Congress or outrage from allies. It's now or never to break Hanoi's will. From December 22nd through 24th, the campaign continues with a more measured but unrelenting tempo. Each of those nights, packages of 30 B-52s strike carefully selected targets. The Americans, leveraging the painful lessons of the first nights, now execute their raids with improved tactics and a bit of caution. They vary attack directions and altitudes more frequently. They also expand the target list beyond the immediate Hanoi area to avoid repeatedly flying into the same SAM killing zones. For instance, on the night of December 22nd, targets include warehouses and train yards in areas like Tai Nguyen and other outlying provinces, hitting where defenses might be thinner. This keeps the North Vietnamese guessing. These few days bring a welcome turn for the Americans. No B-52 is lost on December 22nd, 23rd, or 24th. The changes in strategy are paying off. US suppression of enemy air defenses, the wild weasels, and fighter bombers is effectively silencing many SAM sites before the bombers arrive. North Vietnamese missile crews, having expended so many rounds in the initial frenzy, are now firing more sparingly, perhaps hoarding missiles for the expected big one yet to come. And indeed, the Americans seem to be holding something in reserve. A sense is building among crews that the biggest blow is imminent. While the losses of big jets have halted for now, the air war still rages. North Vietnamese MiG fighters continue to prowl whenever they see an opportunity, though they face daunting odds. USAF Phantom escorts and radar surveillance make it difficult for MiGs to surprise the B-52s. There are a few tense dogfights in the dark skies. On December 23rd, a MiG-21 managed to sneak up on an escort formation and downed an American F-4 Phantom, sending it spinning in flames. One of the few victories the MiG pilots could claim during this period. But the B-52 formations themselves remain effectively shielded. No MiG is able to shoot down a Stratofortress. Instead, the inverse happens again. On Christmas Eve, December 24th, the 7th night of operations, as 30 B-52s make their bombing runs near Hanoi, a lone MiG-21 darts into the bomber stream. Perhaps the North Vietnamese pilot is seeking revenge or a desperate win on the night before Christmas. But once more, the B-52's stinger proves lethal. A gunner named Airman First Class Albert Moore, manning the tail guns of the B-52, dubbed Ruby 03, tracks the incoming MiG and lets loose a burst of tracers. Against all odds, the communist jet is struck and sent down in a ball of fire. In the span of a week, the old Stratofortress, an aircraft first built in the 1950s, has now shot down 2 of the supposedly nimble MiG fighters. These improbable aerial gunfight victories become legendary among bomber crews. They bolster morale, suggesting that even as technology races ahead, with missiles and jets, a steady hand on a machine gun can still make a difference. Just like in the stories of World War II bomber gunners. December 24th's missions conclude successfully, with all American bombers returning to base. That night, as Christmas Eve turns to Christmas Day, the US forces implement a planned 36-hour bombing pause. Despite the ferocity of the campaign, Washington had signaled this pause as a gesture, a brief respite for the holiday, and a final opportunity for Hanoi to reconsider and come to terms. In previous years, bombing halts around Christmas were used as attempts to spur negotiations. So, on December 25th, no bombs fall on Hanoi. An eerie quiet settles over the embattled city. On the ground, North Vietnamese workers and soldiers race against time to repair what they can. They bulldoze debris off vital roads and rails, restore damaged anti-aircraft guns, and, most critically, resupply the SAM batteries with whatever missiles they can find. Hanoi's missile stocks had been drawn down frighteningly low by the week's barrages. but the pause allows trains from China to unload new crates of the long, white, Soviet-made missiles, and local depots to redistribute their remaining inventory. Far from viewing the pause as a mercy, the North Vietnamese see it as an opportunity. They interpret the break as a potential sign of weakness or wavering resolve by the US, reasoning that the Americans might not have the stomach to continue if met with enough resistance. Therefore, on Christmas Day, while some Hanoi residents attend makeshift holiday masses in bombed churches or simply take a breath above ground, the military frantically reloads for the next round. The brief calm before the storm must be used well, because they suspect the Americans are not finished yet. And they are correct. Capture 4. Maximum effort. The Christmas bombing climax. The day after Christmas 1972 dawns with a sense of impending drama. President Nixon has not heard any conciliatory signals from Hanoi during the pause. The North Vietnamese, for their part, have not capitulated. Rather, they seem defiant. So the operation is set to resume with redoubled intensity. What comes on December 26th, the 8th day of bombing, is the largest single-day aerial strike of the entire Vietnam War. A massive demonstration of maximum effort designed to hammer Hanoi and Haiphong into submission. On Guam, in the pre-dawn hours of December 26th, crews are briefed for an all-out mission. This is to be a coordinated, simultaneous attack from multiple directions, a tactic intended to confuse and overwhelm enemy defenses. The plan calls for an unprecedented number of B-52s to hit Hanoi in one giant wave, while another large group hits Haiphong at the same time. By afternoon, a record 78 B-52 bombers are airborne from Guam, joined by 42 B-52 bombers from Utapao, 120 Stratofortresses in total, converging on North Vietnam. This is nearly every available bomber that can fly. The complex choreography begins hours earlier. At Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, fully loaded B-52s rumble out of revetments in succession. It takes over 2 hours for all of them to take off, one after another, pounding the runway with their combined thrust. Ground crews, support staff, and even off-duty airmen gather to watch this incredible spectacle of air power. Many have never seen so many B-52s in the sky at once. It's an awe-inspiring and somber sight. Among the observers is a Soviet trawler ship lurking off Guam's coast, ostensibly a fishing vessel, but actually packed with electronics to monitor US activity. The Soviet sailors radio an alert to Hanoi. A huge strike is on its way. But the warning offers little advantage. Hanoi already expects the worst, and now the juggernaut is truly rolling. As night falls on December 26th, Hanoi steels itself for the crescendo of destruction. This time, the Americans execute a clever strategy. Instead of sending the B-52s in along one or two axes as before, they split them into multiple approach vectors. 4 major formations of B-52s approach Hanoi nearly simultaneously from different directions: north, south, east, west, like great flying wedges converging. At the very same time, 3 similar bomber formations swing toward Haiphong, the port city roughly 60 miles to the east of Hanoi. In total, 210 heavy bombers and support aircraft saturate the skies. The coordination is breathtaking. Never before have so many strategic bombers struck in unison in the jet age. Each formation of B-52s has to hit its initial point at just the right moment, so that all bombs can be delivered within a tight 15-minute window, minimizing the time defenders have to react effectively. Just after 10 p.m., the nightmare returns to Hanoi tenfold. Air raid sirens blare frantically, but are soon drowned out by a continuous thunder in the heavens. Residents and even hardened soldiers describe the sound of this raid as something beyond anything prior, a deep, unending rumble, as if the very sky is collapsing. The first bombs land, and the city quakes, then more and more, from every quarter. In those fateful 15 minutes, thousands of bombs rain on and around Hanoi. The targets hit are those critical sites that remain operational, the major railroad lines and switching yards that feed supplies into the capital, the few power plants still providing electricity, storage warehouses, bridges, and the Yen Vien rail yard, already struck but hit again to ensure total paralysis. In Haiphong, The harbor facilities and shipyards receive similar brutal treatment. Ships in the port, including foreign merchant vessels, are rocked by massive blasts as ordnance blankets the docks. The earth itself seems to heave under the impact of so much explosive tonnage. It felt like an earthquake, one Hanoi resident recalled. The streets rippled, and walls cracked or crumbled. For the men in the B-52s, this night is the ultimate test. Flying into this maelstrom of their own making, they endure the fiercest defensive fire the North Vietnamese can muster. Over 1,200 SAMs have been fired since the campaign began, and tonight, the enemy launches a last, desperate torrent. SAM crews, pushed to their limits, launch missile after missile into the converging bomber streams. The sky over Hanoi becomes a chaotic light show of burning rocket fuel and tracers. One B-52 crew, call sign Lilac-02, finds themselves almost literally swimming through explosions. They later recall hearing the constant electronic tone of their threat receivers signaling missile locks, one after another, and the calm voice of their tail gunner calling out, "Missile at 6 o'clock. Missile at 3 o'clock," as the projectiles streak towards them. The radio chatter is intense and often broken by static and the thunder of flak. Bomber pilots coolly report, "Bombs away," while others warn, "Break left! Break left!" to dodge rising threats. In that cacophony, a B-52 from the first wave is hit by multiple SAMs. Other crews hear only a garbled shout, and then silence from that bomber's call sign. Parachute beacons begin chirping shortly after, meaning some crew have bailed out. Each such loss is noted with grim acknowledgement. But there is no time to pause. The remaining crews focus on releasing their bombs and getting out alive. Down below, the North Vietnamese defenses suffer from the sheer scale of the attack. Jamming aircraft have blanketed their radars with false echoes. Chaff has obscured clear tracking, and the simultaneous multi-directional strikes have thrown their coordination into disarray. Reports come in of missiles launched at phantom targets or in directions where no B-52s are. Still, enough SAMs find the mark to make the raid costly. When the massive December 26th onslaught finally subsides and the last bomber turns for home, 2 B-52s have been shot down near Hanoi, and several others are damaged. But the objectives are achieved. The targets are heavily cratered and burning. North Vietnam's capital has been dealt a punishing blow. For Hanoi's leadership, December 26th is a night of crisis. Communications with some military units are lost as bombs sever cables and knock out transmission stations. In makeshift bunkers beneath the city, officials, including General Vuong Nguyen Gap and Party First Secretary Lê Duan, must have wondered how much more their regime can endure. The psychological impact is immense. In the infamous Hoa Lo prison, the Hanoi Hilton, where American POWs have languished for years, the captured US pilots and soldiers listen to the unprecedented bombardment with a mix of awe and grim satisfaction. Many of these POWs had been tortured and mistreated. Now they witnessed their captors flinching at each distant explosion. Later, some POWs would recall seeing their prison guards, usually harsh and domineering, trembling and far more subdued during those nights, as if they too sensed that the tables might be turning. One American POW noted the guards' faces were ashen after a particularly heavy strike. Another said, for the first time, they were scared. And oddly, that lifted our spirits. Indeed, these prisoners, powerless inside their cells, silently cheer each blast that rocks Hanoi, hoping it heralds their liberation. Back in the skies, after the massive December 26th strike, the B-52 crews return to base with a sense that the climax has passed. Many targets in Hanoi and Haiphong are now either destroyed or so badly damaged that additional strikes would yield diminishing returns. But the campaign isn't over just yet. On December 27th and 28th, day 9 and 10 of the offensive, President Nixon orders the bombings to continue, albeit at a slightly reduced scale compared to the Christmas raid. On those nights, roughly 60 B-52s are launched for each mission, focusing on any remaining critical targets, and, importantly, keeping up the pressure until North Vietnam explicitly agrees to resume peace talks. December 27th sees another round of heavy exchanges. Even after the devastation of the previous night, Hanoi's air defenses still have fight in them. The North Vietnamese, likely using some newly delivered SAMs and whatever remained in their arsenal, managed to shoot down 2 more B-52s on the night of the 27th. One bomber goes down over North Vietnam. Another limps back across the Laotian border toward Thailand before the damage forces its crew to eject, thankfully over friendly territory, where rescue helicopters retrieve them. Hanoi also throws up its remaining fighter aircraft in one last attempt. In the melee, they succeed in shooting down a couple of U.S. escort planes. 2 F-4 Phantoms are lost that night to MiG attacks. But these are Pyrrhic tactical victories. By this point, North Vietnam's integrated air defense network is on the brink of collapse. Many radar stations have been bombed and cannot coordinate effectively. The supply of SAMs, once abundant, has been almost exhausted from firing over 1,000 missiles in just over a week. Pilots report that the once formidable barrages of 6 missiles at a time have dwindled to the occasional single missile launched in desperation, a snapshot, hoping for a lucky hit. The MiG fighters, too, are nearly helpless. Their airfields are cratered, and they lack clear guidance from radar control. Essentially, after the night of December 27th, Hanoi is defenseless against the B-52. The Sky Giants now roam with growing impunity. On December 28th, another 60 B-52s arrive over North Vietnam. This time, the missions go almost unopposed. Only a handful of SAMs are fired, and none make contact. The Americans methodically bomb remaining targets, like storage sites and rail links that had been spared earlier. The North Vietnamese leadership, by now, has gotten the message loud and clear. The reality is stark. If the bombing continues much longer, Hanoi's ability to continue fighting or even maintain basic functions will be in jeopardy. That day, secret diplomatic signals are sent out. Hanoi indicates to intermediaries and through channels to Washington that they are ready to resume peace negotiations immediately, essentially on the terms that had been discussed before. President Nixon has achieved what he sought, a return to the negotiating table. But communication and verification take a little time. Thus, on December 29, 1972, the 11th day since the campaign began, the U.S. launches what will be the final missions of Linebacker II. About 60 B-52s take off for one more night of strikes. They hit a few last pre-assigned targets, mostly in the areas around Hanoi. For example, the Thi Nguyen rail yard and some storage depots that had been rebuilt. However, by the time they arrive, there is almost no opposition. North Vietnam's SAM batteries are practically out of missiles. Some sites have literally fired their last round. Only 23 SAMs are launched in total that day, half-heartedly and without coordination. Not a single B-52 is hit. The U.S. bomber crews carry out their final bombing runs in an environment utterly changed from a week prior. Where once they faced curtains of flak and missiles, now there is relative quiet, punctuated only by sporadic and feeble attempts at defense. And then, just like that, it stops. 11 days of whirlwind destruction and courage, terror and resolve. Over. Hanoi is left smoldering and stunned. The 11-day war, as some will call Operation Linebacker II, has accomplished its immediate aim. North Vietnam's leaders have signaled they will return to Paris to sign a peace accord. President Nixon, via his national security advisor Kissinger, communicates that further bombing will cease. On the American air bases, an exhausted jubilation mixes with relief. The aircrews are told on December 30th that no further B-52 strikes over North Vietnam are planned. Maintenance crews who had worked around the clock can finally stand down. Pilots and crew who had nightly stared death in the face now take a breath, many quietly thanking God or fate that they survived. In Hanoi, the all-clear sirens sound, and an uneasy quiet unfolds as people emerge to assess what is left of their city. Capture 5. Aftermath. The Peace of Paris. The human and material toll of those 11 days is staggering. For North Vietnam, exact figures of casualties remain uncertain, but by their own account, Over 1,000 military personnel and civilians were killed. Entire neighborhoods in Hanoi lay in ruins due to errant bomb strikes. Most infamously, a residential street called Cam Tien was hit on December 26th, killing hundreds of civilians in one terrible night. The Bach Mai Hospital, struck on the 21st, lost many of its staff and was largely destroyed. Railway lines, the lifeblood of transport, were blown apart. Practically every rail bridge between Hanoi and China was down. Haiphong's port was smashed and blockaded. In short, North Vietnam's war infrastructure was dealt a crippling blow. For the United States, the cost was also significant. In those 11 days, 15 B-52 bombers were shot down, and several others badly damaged. Each B-52 loss meant 6 men. Out of those crews, some were rescued, but many were not. In total, 33 American airmen from the B-52 force were captured and became POWs during Linebacker II, joining the ranks of flyers already imprisoned in Hanoi. Another 26 crewmen were killed or went missing in action during the campaign. The US also lost about a dozen other aircraft, including fighter bombers, F-4 Phantoms, A-6 Intruders, A-7 Corsair IIs, and even a few high-tech F-111 stealthy bombers to the intense air defenses. These losses were a heavy burden to bear in such a short span. Yet, militarily, the operation demonstrated something crucial. The B-52 Stratofortress, that long-serving behemoth born in the 1950s, had proven it could fight its way through the densest defenses of the 1970s and deliver a knockout punch. This was strategic bombing in the classic sense, reminiscent of the Allied bombing of Germany or Japan in World War II, revived in the jet age. It was a controversial approach, but in the eyes of US leaders, it worked. As one Air Force general put it later, the BUFF, big ugly fat fellow, i.e. the B-52, had succeeded where all other tactics had failed. Hanoi was compelled to act. Indeed, true to their back-channel messages, North Vietnam returned to the negotiating table in Paris within days of the bombing halt. By January 8, 1973, talks resumed in earnest. There was a new gravity to them. Both sides understood that the brink had been reached. The resulting agreement, finalizing essentially the terms hashed out earlier in the fall, was signed on January 27, 1973, and became known as the Paris Peace Accords. North Vietnam agreed to a ceasefire and to release all US prisoners of war. The United States agreed to withdraw all its remaining forces and to dismantle its bases in South Vietnam. South Vietnam's government, while unhappy with some provisions, such as allowing North Vietnamese troops to remain in certain areas in the South, was pressured by Nixon to accept the deal, under implicit threat that US support would be cut off otherwise. Publicly, Hanoi maintained that the bombing did not force them to sign. They claimed they had always been willing to sign the October draft, and that the US had come around to their position. Privately, however, they surely recognized that the bombing showed Nixon's resolve, and that the US could and would inflict unlimited damage if talks failed again. President Nixon, for his part, was equally motivated by domestic pressures. He needed the war ended swiftly, and the Linebacker II campaign gave him the leverage to ensure North Vietnam and South Vietnam both fell in line with the agreement. In the weeks that followed, the fruits of the peace agreement became visible. Beginning in February 1973, flights dubbed Operation Homecoming brought American POWs out of Hanoi and back to the United States. Many of these men had spent 6, 7, even 8 years in brutal captivity. Now, gaunt but smiling, hundreds of US prisoners were released and boarded military transport planes, finally heading home. Tears flowed freely as these heroes, some on stretchers, some saluting despite wounds, were welcomed back on American soil. Families reunited in emotional scenes on airport tarmacs, gripping long-lost sons, fathers, husbands. In total, 591 American POWs were returned in early 1973, a direct result of the accords that Linebacker II had helped bring about. This alone, for many Americans, justified the fierce bombing campaign. It got their boys home. The American public, weary of the Vietnam War's toll and turmoil, greeted the end of U.S. involvement with relief. There were no victory parades. The war's outcome was too muddled and contentious for that. But there was a profound sense of closure. The war, at least for America, was finally over. As President Nixon famously stated, it was peace with honor, a phrase meant to suggest that the U.S. had not been defeated, but had honorably withdrawn after securing its objectives. Military historians and strategists would debate Linebacker II for decades. Some argued it was a devastatingly effective use of air power that forced the North Vietnamese to capitulate, pointing to how quickly Hanoi returned to talks after the bombs fell. They cite internal North Vietnamese communications from that time that show genuine alarm at the destruction and a desperate need to end the onslaught. Indeed, one North Vietnamese officer reportedly described those 11 days as when we felt the war might truly destroy us. On the other hand, some analysts claim that Hanoi was going to sign the peace deal anyway, and that the bombing was unnecessarily cruel, noting that the final terms signed in January were not substantially different from what had been on the table in October. According to this view, the bombing's real effect was to persuade South Vietnam's Thieu to accept the agreement by showing that the US would go to extreme lengths, like ravaging the North, to defend South Vietnam's position. But ultimately, the US was intent on leaving with a signed deal. There is truth in both perspectives. What is clear is that Operation Linebacker II was the culminating military event of America's war in Vietnam. It demonstrated the raw power of US strategic bombing, achieving in less than 2 weeks what years of gradual escalation had not. But it also underscored the war's contradictions. After unleashing unprecedented destruction, the US left the battlefield, and 2 years later, the underlying conflict resumed, leading to the fall of Saigon in April 1975. North Vietnam's will to conquer the South was not permanently broken by the bombing, but it was deferred long enough for the US to extricate itself. For the airmen who flew those B-52s, the 11-day war was a searing experience they would never forget. They saw comrades shot down, endured stress and fear few can imagine, and accomplished a mission of immense scale. Many believed that had such intense bombing been authorized earlier in the war, perhaps the conflict could have ended differently. That remains a haunting what if. Yet, those same airmen also took pride in having done their duty under almost impossible conditions. They demonstrated bravery, skill, and sacrifice, qualities that resonate with the warrior spirit of their father's generation in World War II. The B-52 itself, the venerable Stratofortress, earned an almost mythical reputation from this campaign. Considered an aging aircraft at the time, some joked it was a World War II-era relic because it relied on sheer numbers of dumb bombs rather than modern precision munitions. The B-52 proved it still had teeth. In fact, the very image of those big bombers lumbering through flak and missiles to drop tons of bombs is often compared to the Allied raids over Berlin or Tokyo. Linebacker II was like a modern replay of those historic air offensives, and amazingly, the B-52 would live on to fly in the 1991 Gulf War, the 2000s, and even today, a lasting legacy of American air power. In the end, what happened in those fateful 11 days of December 1972 was a dramatic exclamation point to the Vietnam War. North Vietnam couldn't believe the ferocity of the bombardment that Nixon unleashed. It was truly outside their prior experience, and that shock accomplished what negotiation alone could not, forcing Hanoi to make peace, at least temporarily. The Paris Peace Accords brought a halt to the fighting and allowed the United States to exit the quagmire with honor. For the Vietnamese on both sides, it was a pause that provided some relief, a couple of years of reduced fighting, before the final chapter of their long war resumed. But for the Americans, this was the end. The POWs coming home, the last combat troops leaving Vietnam. These were direct outcomes of the 11-day air campaign that broke the stalemate. As we reflect on Operation Linebacker II, the Christmas bombing, we are left with a complex tapestry of heroism and horror. It showed the extremes of warfare. On one hand, a breathtaking display of strategy and aerial might, and on the other, the sobering reality of cities bombed and lives lost. It is a story where machines from an earlier era, those big B-52 bombers, proved decisive in a modern conflict. And it is a testament to the aircrew's courage that they braved the deadliest skies and never flinched from their mission. In just 11 days, they helped end 11 years of American combat in Vietnam. The war story of those B-52s and Hanoi is one of suspense, tragedy, and resolution, a dramatic chapter in history that remains as compelling as it is controversial. In the end, the thundering echoes of those bombings heralded a moment of peace. The guns fell silent, and a war-weary world stepped back from the brink, if only for a while, because a city and a leadership had been driven to the table by an unforgiving rain of steel. The Vietnam War would not truly end until 1975, but the role of the United States in that war effectively concluded in those fiery December nights. Operation Linebacker II had forced a decision. It was a brutal but decisive finale, an unforgettable demonstration of how, in war, sheer force can tip the scales toward peace.